gonna go. What was that? What was that movie about the teacher that like goes to the hood and tries to like turn?
Oh,
these...
cool. I've never seen it. It's Michelle Pfeiffer.
Dangerous Minds.
I
Dangerous
think so.
Minds,
Yeah.
He sits backwards on the chair, right? Is that where that
Okay,
meme's from?
you're crossing Michelle Pfeiffer and Riker from Next Generation.
That's a deep. Yeah, I'm not
Right?
following any of this. Right?
Okay.
What? Okay.
I think Dangerous Minds is when Michelle Pfeiffer.
That's the inner city Michelle Pfeiffer teaching movie.
And I think maybe she does that in there. I don't know. But also Riker on Star Trek The Next Generation.
He does that too.
Always sits backwards on a chair, which is because
interesting.
what's his name?
Captain
Frakes, Jonathan Frakes. He had a spinal injury, so actually it's like a lot of his movements on that show are rooted from his spinal injury, and it's kind of difficult for him to sit certain ways. So he'd always kind of sit that way.
Interesting. Yeah. So we're just logging back on here to continue the discussion with Jeff from.
Before you go too deep into Castlevania here, you guys were talking like retro gaming just before we started. I want to ask.
I'll always go deep into that, but
I don't have much experience with retro gaming, but you mentioned Metal Gear Solid before. Did you play Metal Gear Online at all?
I did play Metal Gear Online, and I played the original Metal Gear Online when it launched with Metal Gear Solid 3.
Okay.
They re-released Metal Gear Solid 3 as Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence.
Okay.
And it was sort of like the proto for Metal Gear Online. And that is the deepest into online gaming I've ever gotten in my life.
Oh, interesting.
So I kept it alive in MGS4.
Right.
Metal Gear Online proper. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes, that was one. Yeah, I
And
played
then they
on
did
PS3.
it in 5 as well. But yeah.
Okay.
So PS3. Yeah,
Yeah.
I played it.
Nice. Okay, yeah. That's all I had.
Were you into it?
I was,
Yeah.
I played it for a while. Yeah, it was very interesting mechanics. Like it's a third-person shooter, right? So, yeah, like I know the first-person shooting mechanics were so strange with it. Like you didn't ever even want to use first-person, right? Because I guess there's like no like auto aim with it or aim assistance, right?
Yeah, he was trying to have it like a little bit of every which way for the controls of Metal Gear Solid 4. I actually preferred the 3 version of Online because
I never played it.
It
so.
focused more on like trickery and stealth and gimmicks than it did like aiming and combat. It was like, oh, get in the cardboard box or like hide behind this wall and like
that was still
fake
around.
guys out. It
right?
was, but I think the focus was more on the trickery and the stealth tactics in 3.
Yeah.
And 4, it was like a little more like Call of Duty aiming and shooting, but still not all the way there with that either.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the interesting things about Metal Gear and specifically Metal Gear Online, I guess, is in the combat. The combat system is pretty complex, right? Because you have like the close quarter combat mechanics, you have the knife, you have like random, like the box running and like hiding, skill tree. What else was there? Just all these random like perks.
Porno mags.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Little distraction landmines. If you lay down a porno mag and somebody sees it, they end up looking down and getting like stunned for a while.
Yeah, but like there were like actual like skills you could upgrade to, if you selected the like CQC, the close quarter combat loadout, you could like choke slam people and stun them in one shot. Or like, choke them out really quickly, right?
Yeah, I remember this a little bit. All that was new in 4. 3 was like,
it didn't
you
have
just
that?
kind of, well, you had like those like tools and abilities, but there was no level trees or there was no loadouts. So it was like everyone's playing on an equal playing field pretty much.
Yeah, but interestingly enough, like it seemed in the end that it was a disadvantage to have like, the level 3 or 4, like, I don't know, CQC or assault rifle skill tree. Like the pros would have like level 1 runner, level 1 like assault rifle, level 1 something else, but like just a very balanced like loadout.
And that's the thing when you get to like these online games is like once it's put out there live, someone's going to find a way to like optimize it in such a way that it's like it's so hard to create a game where like taking different approaches is actually balanced or fair.
Right.
It's just like, nope, like you could
There's
go
one way to
online and
crack
look
it,
it up
yeah,
and
yeah.
do it this way because that's how you're
Yeah.
going to be best. And then it's
Yeah.
sort of sucks the fun out of it at that point.
Yeah. And like the pros, the people who like played competitively with it, basically the way you would even engage in combat would be this very like, you know, you'd run around in the box, and because it's third person, you'd be like running one way and then setting up your camera another way, basically lining up the shot. Then you'd like pop out of the box and quickly like try and headshot them. And then if you miss, you go back into the box and you're like strafing again. So it's like a very like weird specific combat style that, you know, became like the de facto kind of pro approach to the game.
Yeah, it becomes this very like
Yeah.
deconstructed thing
Right.
that was not what anybody ever
Yeah.
intended it to be.
Yeah.
And it takes on this whole life of its own
Right.
where it's sort of whatever like illusion was meant to be cast as far as like the sort of combat simulator or
Right.
something, it becomes this goofy mockery of it, but
Yeah.
it also is the optimized like pro level way of playing. So it's just becomes a whole other beast than what it was ever meant to be.
That kind of happened with like Diablo and stuff too, where like in theory there's supposed to be like different approaches you can take, but especially in like PvP situations, but you know, with especially with the early ones, like regardless of class, there was just some things that were like so OP that like everyone would just end up doing the same. Everyone would optimize things the same way, like have the same equipment, same kind of attacks and stuff, right? And so past a certain point, you would kind of just know what everyone was doing the same thing, and you know there wasn't much.
And they'd have to like nerf a skill like once a week to like
kind of try to.
Which then
balance
I
it
have
out.
my own issues with that when the sort of the mechanics are shifting under
Right.
you. I'm not a big fan of patches and updates that change what a game is. It's just sort of, I think, like I get it, I understand it, but there's a point where it's like, what game are we playing? And what's the point of learning these strategies if they're going to crumble away from you? I'm not really into online or competitive
I'm not
gaming,
a fan
but
either, really. I mean,
it's my favorite. I think I
Online?
pretty much I was
Competitive
pretty
online,
like
yeah.
not necessarily competitive, but I know online for some reason was just very captivating.
I definitely like. I had a phase where I was into like Diablo, StarCraft kind of stuff with the early ones, and yeah, I mean it's fun. It does have that element, but probably wouldn't get too into it now. Seems kind of pointless, but it definitely can be super fun if you
There's
if you're interested in. Yeah,
a social element of it that
Yeah.
I think gets overblown a little bit, but it is there.
yeah.
I understand the fears of it being like pointless, like you said.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
what,
again,
what am I getting good at
am I
here?
getting good
To
at?
what
Yeah.
end?
Yeah, well, I mean, like when you're in, I think when I was doing that kind of stuff in high school, I mean, yeah, it was sort of the social aspect where you like, you know, do with your buddies or maybe even people you didn't know, but there was that kind of social side to it.
I
But,
walked through Taito Station earlier today, and there were some fighting game machines, and I was like, man, I kind of do wish I had some vocabulary with one of these. You know, there's like newer Street Fighter, which I don't know, but like if I knew Street Fighter 5, it would be kind of fun to sit next to this stranger
you
in
could
Tokyo right
probably-
now and challenge him.
you probably could. I mean, like they'd destroy you in like 2 seconds. But
That's the thing.
I mean, they just
E Honda's still E Honda,
Yeah.
but like
they're not like the people that actually go to arcades at this point don't really like fuck around, right? And like every time I've ever innocently tried to like sit down in an arcade here over the course of like, I don't know, 10 years or something, like some 11-year-old will just sit down and rape me in like 2 seconds. Like and they just won't stop. Like they'll just continually keep
I could still hold my own
demolishing you. Yeah.
in a basic Street Fighter 2.
yeah.
I can sit down in a Street Fighter 2
Yeah.
cabinet and hold my own against a stranger, and maybe I'll go seek that opportunity. But you don't see 2 as much anymore.
yeah.
It was at the Taito I was at today, but no one was sitting at it. So
I think if you end up anywhere where people actually congregate, like the level of players here is like so obsessively high that you're not, at least in my, like I thought it was pretty good at, you know, fighting games and stuff, but I started playing Japanese players. I'm like, all right, yeah, this is a whole other.
It's their one escape, right?
This is their whole other. This is a whole other level of devotion, and
if you're not into tobacco and alcohol,
Yeah,
then you best get into either, I don't know, maid cafes or video games.
You guys do any of that shit?
No, not really.
The maid cafe thing or anything?
I've never even been to one, to be honest. I went to a girls' bar once, but that was about it.
Dude, I hate that experience.
Maid cafes or
the girls' bar? I mean, all of it. It's kind of like the maid cafe is at least like a little more like
novel, I guess.
Novel, and like you're a spectator and there's a show. But the girls' bar is like, it just doesn't work. I
think you have to give some time to the kyaba or the whole hostess system. I mean, like, you have to give it some time just to like sort of understand the culture. I think like once you get to the point where you sort of understand it, like it's up to you if you want to go deeper. But it's such a huge part of the culture, man. I mean, it's just like, I feel like you sort of can't really understand Japan in a way without having some familiarity with it. As weird as it is, I mean, it's. I mean, when I was, first moving here as a student and going with Japanese friends, I mean, it's very much like just, we go inside and it's like, what do I do, right? Like, I don't know what to do, right? Like, I just,
so like a girls' bar or where?
Well, like, kyaba or
kyaba,
hostess club or something. I mean, if you really go to one and you just sit down, it's like sort of.
But don't they like greet you at the door and
well,
like
they do, but there's still.
You?
Yeah, well, yeah, but there's still a sense of like, it's almost like supposed to be your responsibility to grandstand. So like they're not. Is why I think a lot of people struggle with it is because they're like, well, aren't the staff supposed to be going out of their way to make you feel welcome, or like to engage you, and like. In a real kyaba or hostess situation, I mean, it's more like the customer is supposed to just feel the freedom to let loose, and like talk about like, let me tell you about Metal Gear Online, right? And then they're supposed to just like listen, right?
Oh, I can't. So, it's so uncomfortable for me.
Well, that's why. So that I think that's the perspective difference that like someone that's maybe coming to it for the first time, but that's what like the girls are expecting. Like in
my experiences so far, I've just like tried my Japanese out, and just like trying take some language lessons out of it.
I mean, it's one way to look at it, but they're expecting you to be rocking up pretty drunk already and having some idea of what you want to, talk about or unload or kind of relax with. So, yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like once you figure it out, I mean, I think there's, like we have a lot of friends that are very heavily, deeply into it. Like, our friend up in Sendai and,
down in Fukuoka.
Yeah. There's a few people that are very heavily into the scene and, and it's just kind of part of the lifestyle. So I think it's not something I care to put any time or money into myself at this point. But I think having some both familiarity and understanding with it is kind of important to seeing how Japan works, because it is such a big part of the culture, right? So
I think part of the issue for me, among a lot of things, but it seems like a very guaranteed way to go to a place where, I don't know how to put this properly, but like you're not going to find a real girl here. I know that's a complicated term. I don't mean to just say like they're not real girls, but like
they're organic.
They're organic. But
yeah.
Like this is the number one place where you're going to go and not see a natural, not working woman who you could have a conversation with. You're guaranteeing yourself only manufactured conversation, or like,
yeah. Well, it gets, the lines do get very blurry is the thing, and a lot of people do have relationships with hostesses. They marry them.
I guess that's the same thing in the States. People marry strippers, and that's a thing. but it just seems impenetrable to me.
Yeah, it's a very real thing here, and again, most of them have their shelf life of doing that job is like pretty short, right? So
Sure.
it's even 30 is getting pretty up there, right? So it's sort of I think like dating or marrying a hostess is like probably more I guess normal than like maybe. Well, I don't know. I don't really like comparing it to like strippers or something. I mean, I guess you could compare it, but I wouldn't say it's anything too out of the ordinary here. But it's tricky because, I mean, that's the question is like, where's the line between customer and reality? Where does that start?
I hate navigating that
so-
space.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
just like so unattractive to me because
Yeah.
like one of my rules back home with like dating is like don't bother with anybody who gets paid to be nice to you.
Yeah.
Because they're real people and they could have genuine feelings, but I don't want to have to parse through what's performance and what's genuine.
I think like there's a lot of people that get lost in that maze, and they're like, that's why they're there. They're like, I want to find my way through the maze, right? Like I want to find something real in something that maybe doesn't seem like it's real or could be real. So, including our friend in Sendai who is an interesting dude, and I would actually love to get him on this podcast at some point if we could get him down. But he's very deep into the nightlife of northern Japan, and massive regular hostess club regular, girls bar regular, and puts his huge network. I think he's even done tours or something as like a part-time job. But he's just really deep in the scene, right? And I think for him that sort of is part of the interest is like, maybe my girl is going to be going on a date with a customer tomorrow, but I don't know if she is or not, or I don't know what's going to happen, right? So there's people that get quite kind of into that or deep into it, which probably seems kind of strange, but it is kind of part of the, I guess, culture or how it works in practice. Yeah.
I mean, Japan's pretty big on like performative, I don't know, social performance in general. I don't know. So I think for Japanese people, it's kind of comforting to actually, I'm going to a store and, I'm ordering off the menu, manufactured conversation. Not manufactured, what's the word?
Yeah.
False interest or whatever, or yeah, like Japanese people typically don't really like the ambiguity of genuine interaction where you're figuring out in real time what the interaction is, I guess, right?
Yeah. Like it's like unscheduled activities or
Right.
something.
It makes it more ambiguous for me as an outsider. It's just like the conversation gets so ambiguous because I don't know what's happening at all. It's very confusing.
Yeah. So I would recommend, dipping your toe in it just to like sort of at least experience it.
I have. I've been to a couple.
Yeah. It's
Like I
worth
said, I had the conversations and they go like, this is what I'm learning in Japanese is tends to be where I go with it. I don't go like, I work in movies. A big wig, throw it away. I don't do any of that.
You should.
You probably
I have no
You
interest in
should
doing that.
big shot them or what's the word?
It's definitely a place for grandstanding where you kind of expected to sort of, even if you're just some low level clerk or something, you're supposed to like grandstand it out into epic proportions or whatever.
It's kind of nice. I don't having a space for that. I get it a little bit, but
yeah, it's an interesting issue. I mean, it's just something that like doesn't. I feel like it doesn't map cleanly onto other. Certainly doesn't really map cleanly onto anything in the US. I mean, like people compare it to like, strippers and stuff, but it's not really the same thing. And like, it doesn't really fill the same niche, I guess. And
there are the guys who just go to strip clubs and just talk to the girls and just offload or grandstand though.
Yeah. Well, I guess that would maybe have a closer, component. There's even like, like the whole snack mama thing.
What's a snack mama?
What do you think?
I don't know, but I know I want one.
There's plenty within walking distance from here.
Let's go out and get some snack mamas. What are we doing here?
Yeah. So snack mama is like, let's say you're like some 55-year-old dude, and you're like, look, I ain't got time for this. Like, I don't even want to fuck with these like 22-year-old girls. Like, I'm tired from work. I'm physically tired. Don't want to deal with anyone, but I don't want to go home either, because then I got to confront the reality of my family and like fuck that family. Like it's another awful responsibility. I can't be. It just makes me tired and feel bad, right? So what are these guys gonna do? Well, they go to there's a class of establishment called a snack. Rather unfortunately,
bar, I guess would be kind of the full name, but
rather unfortunately titled because it wrong-footed me so many times where I was actually looking for food. I walk into these places and they're like, "Snakkudayo," and I'm like, "Yeah, bring it on," right? And they're like, "No, snakkudayo." I'm like, "Yeah, that's what I want." And they're like, "No, we don't think that's what you want," right? So what it actually is like a bar where instead of talking to like, various younger women, you talk to a old lady who gets you, right? So like you talk to this, she's tending bar, and you just like, she's there to like kind of take care of you and like, lend an ear as you just like unload about all of your shitty problems, right? And like she kind of just like gives you advice. She's like, "Oh yeah, well you should probably try this," or like, "Oh yeah, that's often the case. Like, what about if you do," right? So, so you're sitting there drinking with the old lady, or the mama, right, as they call her, and yeah, and that's kind of it, right? So you're supposed to like build up a rapport with her, and they have karaoke, so you can sing some songs with her.
I walked into a snack mama place.
Probably,
this is what it was. In Fukuoka, we heard this little like siren song coming out of this pink bar. I was like, what the hell is this place? I had to go poke my head in it, and it looked like, I opened it up and it looked and smelled like a grandma's apartment, kind of like the upholstery on the couches and all that. And I like craned my head in, and it's one old, wonderfully mustachioed man sitting at the bar with a snack mama, as I've just learned, singing karaoke, and it's just the two of them. And I was like, okay, I'm not gonna intervene here. I'm on my way out.
It's one of those things where like if you don't have the cultural programming for it, it's like completely obscure. And you're like, why would anyone ever do this, right?
I saw the two of them, and I was like, well, I understand what's going on here.
Yeah.
I don't need to occupy any of the seats at this bar at present, but I understand this exchange.
So if you're going in there for like anything other than that very specific purpose, then it is going to be like, what's happening here? Like, what?
There are so many codes and classifications of like drinking establishments here that it's like, I feel like in my last trip here, I was really finding my spots, and I was specifically searching for like rock bars and cocktail bars. And doing that, I felt like I was finding places where I could just kind of walk in, get a drink, hang out for a little bit. And this trip, I'm seeing a lot more like of these like girls bar joints where you're like paying like 3,000 yen for an hour, all you can drink, and like the Nomi Hodai thing, and like there's just so many different varieties of it that if it's not exactly what you want, it's the wrong place to go to.
It is very hyper specialized, like especially in the area like central Tokyo where we are now is very like hyper specialized for that kind of stuff. And if you walk in and and you don't have that very specific purpose, like you probably will be like, what is this? Or like, I'm not really vibing with this, or like, I don't really get it. But again, it's very ingrained in the culture, and like, it very much is part of the culture in like weird ways that people consider normal. Like they just think it's a thing to do or place to go.
It's a bunch of creative replacements for going to therapy, I think.
Well,
exactly right. Exactly.
Are they forms of therapy, though?
Arguably, yeah.
Where you're paying somebody to talk to, is kind of what it gets down to a little bit.
right? Yeah. It's, yeah, not too different, I guess, right? Yeah. Just more enshrined in alcohol culture, perhaps. I don't
Which
know.
is
yeah.
can be troublesome for sure. I mean, I got no interest in going to a place to drink where there isn't at least the possibility of like a natural woman entering. I
A
don't.
biological woman.
Yes, I don't.
We
need-
were talking
Yeah,
about, we had this like
right.
other podcast where we were going off on like chemical, nuclear, and biological women.
Mineral.
I
mineral
listened to this
females.
one, yeah.
women, yeah.
but you know, an off-duty woman. You know, like what is the word here for?
Yeah.
I don't. If I'm going to a bar and
Well,
a
it's like an
woman
organic-
won't walk in of her
Yeah.
own volition to get a drink
Yeah.
there, I don't really want to
Yeah.
be there. And I'm not saying I need to go to a bar where there always is a woman at the
Yeah.
bar that I can talk to, but if why would I go to one if there expressly isn't going to be one
Yeah.
there?
Well, yeah, there's that. That's definitely one way to look at it, and I wouldn't say you're wrong. I mean, that's one reason I usually don't fuck with them myself. But
Unless I'm with a group of guys,
Yeah,
like and
yeah.
we're having fun, like
Yeah.
that could be something,
Yeah.
you know. But I've been traveling alone, so I'm walking into these
Yeah,
places and
yeah,
just
yeah.
doing that.
It's
Yeah.
not very appealing to me either. I share your
Yeah.
concerns,
yeah,
but it
yeah.
is the culture, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, like I think like the level of therapeutic discourse that exists in, certainly the current Western countries seems quite strange to Japanese people. Or
Trauma bonding.
Trauma-
I don't know.
yeah, but I just think like people going to see therapists or like
Dude, they're so fucking hard for it back in the States. The whole
Yeah.
like, oh, getting therapy. It's like, oh, God, what? Like, the goal. Like, it's fine. Like, you need, we need mental health issues are a thing, and we need to be mindful of them, and to take efforts to resolve, our mental health issues. Absolutely, by all means. But the whole like hard on for being in therapy in the States is like out of control, and there's like we're losing the forest through the trees here a little bit. Where like the goal is to not be
yeah.
doing this, right? Like it's fine to do that, but that is a means to an ends, and the ends is to not be doing this anymore.
Well, I think like once you take religion out of the equation, and it could be any variety of religion. I mean, it doesn't have to be any specific one, but I think once that's sort of taken off the table, then it's like whack-a-mole, right? So it's going to pop up. If you whack the religion down, then it's going to pop up in therapeutic discourse or something, or like some going to the hostess club. Like there's other like social needs for.
Man, I am drawing some new parallels here between like men at hostess clubs and women with therapy.
Yeah.
So it's way more popular with women in the States, but it's like you realize like what you have this total mad on for is paying somebody to talk to. So there's all these women in the States who are like, yeah, I just get to talk about myself endlessly and pay somebody to listen. That's a racket for sure. That's the same thing as what's going on at hostess clubs and whatnot.
Well, it's not just hostess clubs. Maybe it's host clubs.
Oh
too,
yeah, I've seen some of those.
which is where
Let's go to one of those after this.
the hosts. Yeah, no, you'd probably be amazed, man. They're much more.
I'm sure I would.
They're much more entertaining than you're ready for. Like they're pros, right? So I mean, but it very much is what a lot of women do here, precisely for that reason, is just having some dude to listen and talk to.
It's kind of a dirty secret of the whole industry is all the money just funnels up to host clubs eventually because where do the kiabas go after work after everyone unloaded all their problems?
Well, that's the
onto
thing,
them,
man. So like you
Really?
you go to, or like we go, or the Japanese workers will go to hostesses, but then the question is then where do the hostesses themselves go?
Who's going to investigate the investigators?
Yeah.
A la, what's his name? Anyway.
Yeah. So the answer is they go to hosts, right? And so the whole industry is very like circular, and like I think one time I described it kind of unkindly is parasites feeding on other parasites. So it's just like it's a big, and like sex workers are in there too, like prostitution and kind of. I mean, so it's a big circular money exchange where, hostesses are making insane, extraordinary amounts of money from their customers, which they then dump right back into hosts.
See,
who
I
then-
had this all wrong. I thought this
so-
was like a horny housewife type thing, was going to the host clubs.
It's that too.
Well,
It's that too.
there's an element of that too, but it's sort of almost like secondary to the, I don't know, psychological element or something. But it is a very, like, he's not wrong. Like, it is, the money does tend to like get in this weird little circle of.
Are any of these hosts or hostesses not Asian?
Some, right? I mean, we had a friend or have a
Yeah,
friend.
there are, man. I mean, they're like,
What I'm getting at is,
Yeah.
can I get a job as a host? That's not what I'm
if
getting
you're,
at. Like, could I, hypothetically?
in theory, you could, but the problem is that it's extremely hierarchical. So like day one, they're going to be like, okay, you're on cleaning toilets duty today. And then they're going to send you out onto the street to recruit, right? So you're going to have to like go up to strangers in public and be like, oh, like, I know this cool dude, like, Ryo, like, would you like to meet him? He's like super cool and he could probably, so you're going to have to like they're going to give you the shit tasks
Yeah.
to start out with, right?
If I had started coming to Japan
Yeah.
as like a 20-year-old,
Yeah.
yeah.
You'd be,
Hey, it's not too late for you.
No,
You're a
you know
handsome
what?
man.
I think I still got it a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it's not
Yeah.
too
I think
late for me
so.
on that
Yeah.
front.
Yeah.
But I think, I'd be throwing away some other decent things going for me to do something.
Yeah. We have we do have friends who again, we probably won't name them for at the moment.
I mean, no
but,
need to, basically, yeah.
But we do have friends who went quite, Western friends who did get quite deep into it, and they actually did climb the ladder, and they actually scored a visa marriage from a client, and various things. I mean, they were able to advance their life goals through being a host, right?
That's
So,
a real journey right there.
it's a crazy journey.
pretty badass, actually.
It is, but it definitely is a pretty steep, super competitive, and they're not going to go out of their way to, especially if you're not Japanese. I mean, they're not going to want to see you do well, right?
That's
So,
why I was asking.
Yeah. So I mean, like in
But there's
theory,
a lot of
yeah.
like Filipina.
there are, but that's
They're kind of in their own industry.
they're in their
right?
own industry,
but
yeah.
but it is here.
It is here.
It is.
I have
It
not
is here.
seen non-Asian
Yeah,
like anything.
Yeah, I guess.
there's a vanishingly few small amount of them. But so like our mutual friend that we were just talking about, so he had to basically go there and like insist that they at least trial him, because like he just rocks up and he's like, I want to do this, I'm really serious, and they're like, you're not going to last 2 days, blah blah blah. So he had to really insist. He had to get through all this shit, bottom tier, bottom rung work, and then work his way up to the point where he could actually kind of do the job, right? Rather than just getting up to doing the job, right? So, so you had to put in a massive amount of time. It's very physically demanding. I mean, you got to be up, you're staying up all night, every night. You're pounding massive amounts of alcohol. You're having to spam entire bottles of champagne and just chug it. And so you're very much, in a certain sense, you're very much at the mercy of the customers, who often strangely don't have much mercy because they're just there to unload their psychic garbage, right? So if you're the guy that has to catch all that, then you're kind of like a garbage man, right? So you're gonna go home covered in shit, metaphorically, and I don't know, sometimes even literally, maybe. So yeah, it's not a very, I don't know, it's certainly an intense job, but yeah.
Yeah, pretty wild.
Mm.
I guess I'm surprised that there's just, even on like from the female side of it, that there's not like a total like white girl hostess club or anything like
Oh,
that.
there are. I mean, there's a lot of white girls doing it, to various degrees. So yeah, there's a small-ish white girl
Yeah. I just haven't
percentage
stumbled upon it
yeah,
in all my,
yeah.
my wanderings around. Man, but yeah, that first job of just like being out in the rain and going like, come on in.
No,
You want to come to like you're standing in a street.
that's
just
the
like,
meat and potatoes, man. That's the scouting.
yeah.
Well, the other thing is like with scouting is like trying to recruit girls for porn. So like if you
Well, everything
yeah,
basically,
well,
right?
recruit them for everything, right?
Yeah.
So that's real meat and potatoes stuff. That is like the entry. If you get good at that, then you can actually sit in the club and get people to come to you, right? But the meat and potatoes stuff of just recruiting straight from the street, I mean that's where it begins, right? So yeah, that's part of the skill set, I guess.
It's crazy. Not my favorite thing. I like video games. I'm way into that.
Yeah. Weirdly, amazingly, like there actually
Is that
are
a segue? Can we call that a segue?
Could
there
be.
actually are video games about this. Like
I'm sure there
there's-
are.
Yeah, there's like simulators for this kind of stuff where got to work your way up and everything. Interestingly enough, we did want to talk more about your creative activities. Well, and kind of maybe what you would think of as like the intersection between your writing and gaming and other stuff that you're putting out.
Yeah. I mean, writing has always been like my thing, and that's how I got into movie making and whatnot, because I just wanted to get closer to that process by any means necessary, even if that meant jobs I never thought I would be interested in, but just getting closer to the process of like making scripts and whatnot. And then in my writing, my personal writing, I just started writing more and more about video games. And you know what? I got writing on video games generally is like the dumbest shit available. Like it's so stupid.
There are some very talented writers. Like the one I always come back to is Jeremy Parrish, if you've heard of him.
Tell me about Jeremy Parrish.
He's been doing it since way back, but he's just kind of like a reviewer and gaming historian maybe. And he does do videos at the moment, but he used to always just do essays and reviews for.
Is this the guy who did the what's his name, Poopins? The
No, it's a
speedrun?
different.
Oh,
It's a different
guy.
guy. That
Okay,
guy's
anyways.
guy's quite thorough as well. But I mean, just one example. Like there are some incredibly talented people doing it, but it is a bit of a thankless task. Where it's sort of.
There are definitely very talented people doing it, and there are like the sort of YouTube essayists that out there that some of them are just like unbelievable. Like they really break things down, but the sort of like baseline of it seems to be like strictly like product review, which boils down to like, should you be a consumer of this product or not? Like, do I sign off on you spending your money on this thing, or am I dissuading you from you spending your money on this thing? Which is a really like just kind of gross,
Right. Yeah.
like boiled down version of what so much of it is. And I think there's so much more going on there than like product review.
That was always the conflict of interest with like the old school gaming mags, like Nintendo Power, because at the end of the day, it's like it exists to like sell products, right?
They
So,
were
like,
big commercials, yeah.
yeah. So they're never gonna like get too critical with anything. I mean, they might kind of go
To an extent, they were defining a canon for what that's worth. I actually do place value in a sort of shared canon of things, like must play games or like must read books. I place probably more value in that than I should, just because I like the clarity of it. I like the organization of like there is a pool to draw from here, and we've done some filtering for you. So like these are the must-haves.
Yeah, I would say like around that, like Nintendo Power, I would say was such a formative magazine and like establishing Nintendo almost as like an identity, right? So I don't know if you ever read Nintendo Power magazine.
My magazine
It's,
was PC Gamer.
Okay,
Mine
yeah,
was
yeah.
Game Informer, though I have a good Nintendo Power collection a little bit.
Yeah,
but
well, Nintendo Power would like it would include a lot of interesting content. I mean, they had like original comics and almost like manga.
dude,
stuff.
the Star Fox comic that
Yeah.
ran in Nintendo Power is like amazing artwork.
The Zelda one is too. Like the Zelda one is quite incredible, and it was done by quite a legendary mangaka who drew and created that. So So they're opening a lot of interesting doors that maybe kids at the time wouldn't have opened otherwise. So
That's actually like a fandom like treasure chest hunt for me is like to get those. I think it was like 3 issues of Nintendo Power that ran that Star Fox manga.
okay, yeah,
I would
yeah,
be
yeah.
really into tracking those down. They are gorgeous.
Probably been collected somewhere. I mean, I think they collected like all the issues of the Zelda one. And it was something like 12. It's a substantial book, right? And it's like fully painted and pretty incredible work actually.
My retro game room is adorned with posters from
Nintendo Power.
Nintendo
Yeah.
Power. Yeah.
Yeah, Nintendo Power was quite deep. Quite a seminal magazine of kind of creating that culture or experience, I want to say, which definitely can't imagine happening now. I mean, like little kids reading magazines is kind of a weird idea at present, but we did, So,
Yeah, magazines in general
Yeah.
just are like, I think Game Informer just stopped like doing anything, and that was the one I grew up with was Game Informer. They had a joint effort with Funko Land, so I would go and like buy retro games at Funko Land, and then there was like a discount you'd get with their like Game Informer promotion. That set me on a whole thing. I really awaited those issues every month and poured over them.
Yeah, totally different headspace where print media, video games, and other interesting kind of comic or manga related content along with that.
It's just evolved into just clickbait, like horse shit. It's like real bad right now. Like, there's like just so little intelligent conversation happening about video games.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say that like, hey, here I am trying to put more of this out, but I'm trying to put more of it out there.
Yeah.
And my approach is like to not do review and to not even necessarily do analysis, but I talk a lot about like how these things affect me in real time and where my life intersects with the moment that I'm playing games. Or
that's an interesting approach. I mean, I think you've done some really interesting things where you're connecting it to what you're playing at the moment versus like how your life is kind of progressing, which again kind of connects to what we were mentioning, that book Lucky Wander Boy, which
dude, this is the best recommendation I've received in years, was you recommending Lucky Wander Boy to me. I'm currently reading it here in Tokyo, which is a great place to be reading this book.
It's a great place to read this book. For people that aren't familiar, this is the first novel by D.B. Weiss, who's one of the creators of the Game of Thrones TV show, who's adapting it and kind of producing it. But before he did that, he was just like a writer, right? And he did his own novel about retro gaming, as weird as it might seem, but doesn't sound very promising and didn't seem too promising when I first, picked it up as a kid, but it's actually quite a well-written and kind of interesting book.
It's I'm loving it, and it feels really like retrospectively targeted at me, or retroactively targeted at me rather, or I don't even know if that's the right word for it, but it's got my fucking number so badly. As this the protagonist is Adam Pennyman, and he obsesses over his recollections of mostly like pre my interest, but like golden age arcade games, and seeking like higher meaning out of them, and the lengths to which he goes to them are like commendable but laughable at the same time, which is like, oh god, you fucking got me. Like that is it.
Yes, it's really interesting. I mean, it is very hyper focused, and I mean, it's like basically is like from about 1980 to 1985, maybe just like classic Pac-Man kind of Centipede kind of arcade games focus, Donkey Kong, but Centipede I think was one.
Snake is more like Nibbles, or like I'm talking about calculator games now, but
these are very extremely basic.
Snake is the one where you eat and grow, and you're avoiding your own tail. But Centipede and Millipede were like shooters where like they're like Space Invader anymore.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, it's quite limited, and it wasn't really my formative games either. But I think the beauty of the book is that like it doesn't really matter, and like he kind of like universalizes his own experience, so you can kind of slot in your own formative games.
Totally. He does a really good job of capturing the like sort of hazy formative experiences where like it's these half remembered things that define us more than anything else. And like fantasy and video games, I think in particularly like really take a hold of that space in like super formative years. You have these like crazy like hallucinogenic memories of these things, and you can't make full sense of them, so you wrestle with it for the rest of your life. And Lucky Wander Boy is the fictional game of the book where he like has this sort of half-baked experience with, and he's obsessed over completing it and making sense out of what these sort of liminal space formative memories are. And that is such an accurate depiction of how some of these things can like inform and define us going forward.
Yeah, it definitely deserves wider attention, and I'm still kind of surprised that like so few people like reference it. Like I've recommended it to a few other people, and yeah, some of them did go ahead and read it, and yeah, they're like, wow, this is
There's not enough reading gamers out there. That Venn diagram needs to widen. We need to like push these circles together.
That's one reason I like when we were doing the Neo Decadence manifesto was like, I was like, well, there's got to be a manifesto of retro gaming because like what. I mean, it's such a basic element of everyday life. So I'm like, there obviously has to be a manifesto of retro gaming, and fair enough. Like it, I think it just turned out to be electronic gaming in general, but it did sort of address some of this. But it's something I would like to see.
I'll take that bull by the horns, man. I will go all in on that. And I think one of the key tenets of like a manifesto of retro gaming is to not engage in emulation.
Okay, yeah.
To engage with original hardware is like key to experiencing it.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, we were playing with Nick's emulator and jumping all over different platforms. But yeah, that we're using DualShock controllers, like DualShock 5 or whatever, and it was definitely weird on some games where you're like, oh, this doesn't feel right because the controller is just not configured.
Huge part of it, but you also said jumping around, and that jumping around is a huge part of it because once you enter the world of emulation, you have everything all at once, and it didn't cost you anything. And this is this confuses the engagement.
Yeah.
Where you actually are seeking out the original cartridge and playing on original hardware. There is an investment of time and yes, even money that makes you like put extra thought and effort into your engagement with it.
Yeah.
There is a quest behind the acquisition that adds value to the engagement, and you zero in ways.
Yeah.
Whereas when you put on the core experience of an emulator is this long fantasy list of everything you ever wanted, and you scroll through and pop on for like a minute and a half and go like, ooh, what's next? And you do, ooh, what's next?
That's
Ooh, what's
all we
next?
do.
Ooh, what's next? And you finish nothing. And you
don't lock into anything.
You don't lock into anything, so you miss the whole thing. But when you play on original hardware, you go like, I fucking got it.
Right.
Like I finally got Earthbound on SNES. I paid $350 fucking dollars for. I'm not saying it always needs to cost that much money, but Earthbound's like ridiculously priced in North America right now, and I've never played it still. I still hold on to my weird hazy childhood memories of playing Earthbound in like a mildewed basement at my friend's house who had that on the Super Nintendo, and we're like, oh, this game, this like Japanese RPG.
It's almost like legendary, right? Like it does have those like weird glimpses, or like you just see something in some magazine and be like, is this even real? Or like what would this even be like? I mean,
and to just like pirate it and have it immediately accessible cheapens it, and you don't even engage with appreciation.
So like, Justin loves Castlevania, and one of these
do I.
I guess that makes me the odd man out here, but So my experience with it basically was, we're over at Nick's place messing around with the emulator, and Justin, really wants me to get into Castlevania and see the beauty of it, but like it's just like frustrating. It's just a frustrating game that like doesn't try and make things fun for you, right? It's almost like, well, yeah, I mean, there's just all sorts of nuances there where like, the stage is set up such that you have to go right and then you come back left, and when you come back left, like the monster that you previously beat respawns, and there's like no rhyme or reason for like what happens when. Like they just made things frustrating deliberately. Yeah,
you're not wrong. I also think one of the key defining elements of a Castlevania game, early Castlevania game, is the defined trajectory of the jump. Whereas like a Mario or most video games, when you jump and are in air, the directional buttons still shift things. But Castlevania, you press it, your height and distance are fully committed.
Right. So you got to commit to every.
There is this slow, plodding, heavy commitment to all of your choices in a Castlevania game.
So if you're 9 years old and you spent 6 weeks allowance on it, and you're committed to beating it, then that's a very different experience to a friend casually suggesting you try it on the emulator where you have 7 different platforms and 500 different games. You're like, this sucks, this isn't fun. Like, let's play Call of Duty.
100%. And I actually think that's one of the great joys of retro gaming is like things weren't optimized, or what's the phrase? Quality of life. There's like the quality of life isn't there in the design. They're harsh and they're brutal, and they require you to learn an entirely new set of rules from the ground up because nothing was normalized yet. So everyone was just sort of taking their own stab at it. Like Nintendo had Mario jumping with like also. It's honestly insane that the first Mario Brothers was like so rooted in one of the buttons being dedicated towards building momentum. Like you go like, oh, you have the D-pad and you jump with A, but that B makes you run faster, and holding B and pressing A.
I found that so frustrating. I was like,
I remember
why isn't it the default?
I remember you were having trouble.
When do you ever want to run slowly?
Well, there's little jumps, and the little jump you don't want too much momentum, but that is just.
But okay, like invert that, right?
Yeah,
make that the slow precision.
It's just so wild that the defining platformer of all time already hits the ground with this kind of high level concept.
The momentum control is so key to it, and like I think that's like a dynamic that I've just like internalized so much that like I just kind of don't even notice it. But like
we completely take it for granted now.
But when I see someone trying it, like, oh, how do I accelerate and then time jumps? I mean, it is like such a revolutionary.
Well, it's like your dominant finger, appendage, whatever, is always busy holding B, right? Like what? I know.
But it's also sort of a standard that like has existed in platformer, like Mario games to date, 2D ones, not 3D ones. But that is weird that the momentum button doesn't apply in 3D, but in 2D games, it's still pretty standard. But then you have
even like Mario Galaxy and whatnot.
Well, Galaxy's a 3D one, but
it's 2D.
3D World, I think, still has that. Super Mario 3D World still has like a basic, you hold the momentum button, which was never called that. But what else would you call it? It's the momentum
just
button.
Hold B, right? You just learn to do it, right? Like, it wasn't really much thought behind it.
But Castlevania is so like defiantly against it, where you're just this heavy trotting character who makes this one beefy jump at a time.
Yeah. Well, I think that was like playing it as a kid. Like that sort of is like. You're like, the first thing you notice is like, oh, it's really easy to die in this game, right? Yeah. And like almost if you fall from something, you die. If you like jump wrong, you die. Things will like, you're going to jump and somebody's going to knock you into a pit.
The knockback is just unapologetic. Yeah. It's brutal.
So, so the level of brutality that exists, so like, as a little kid, like if you even clear the first stage, you're like sort of sitting there sweating because you're like, oh, I just beat a level? Like what? Right? And then you're like, oh shit, now I'm on level 2. Like,
and there's a whole new color palette and a whole new song to go with it.
Right. Even like, it sounds kind of weird, like, but yeah, like even beating a single level as a kid, you were like, like, damn, I needed a shot or something, right? You know, like
Yeah.
I need a sandwich or some cereal. Like I need something because like I just beat a full level of fucking Castlevania, right? So I think that sense of accomplishment is maybe a little bit different than what people would be going in with now.
I also think, yeah, definitely different than what you're going in with now. And I think when you take the time to learn the language of a game, because we take for granted, we expect every game to sort of speak the same language now.
Yeah.
You pick up a modern 3D shooter, you go like, well, the left shoulder button's gonna raise the gun
Right,
and give me
yeah,
my
aim
cursor,
down
and the
sight,
right button's
yeah.
gonna fire it, and then the left and right stick are gonna do these things.
Yeah.
But when you're playing older games like NES games, the language is completely undefined in each new one. And when you sort of penetrate that membrane and get on the other side and go like, "Ooh, I cracked this game. I know how this game works now." You enter a different headspace. It's sort of like there's something mystical about it. It's like a
It
little
does get a bit
ritual.
mystical, man. Yeah, it
Because
does-
you engage in a
yeah.
new language and you're behaving differently. Like you play Bionic Commando and you go like, this is a platformer without a jump button. What is that? How does that work? And you have this grappling hook arm and you go like, this is the worst game ever. This doesn't make any fucking sense. But then when you learn the vocabulary of Bionic Commando and re-engage with it, it reroutes synapses.
Yeah,
And you feel differently playing it now. And when you complete the narrative of what it is like to engage in that vocabulary, it's a wild satisfaction.
That's it's exactly right. And like I think is maybe if you've heard of the neo-decadent writer Damian Murphy. I don't know if you've
I know Damien, I know his work.
So he I'm actually writing an introduction for a collection of his stories, which Aaron is going to release on.
I'm editing this.
Okay, yeah.
So we're working together on this
Okay,
project.
yeah, nice. So yeah, he is a collection entirely of retro gaming themed occult stories of like non-existent games. So he's just like imagining games that plausibly could have existed on various platforms. You know, like one's like a Super Famicom, Super Nintendo game. One's like a ZX Spectrum game. So I think like the imaginative labor of him imagining specifically like this hardware for this game is kind of part of it too. So he does arrive at like very strange places that I've almost like never seen addressed by like any writer really. I mean, like I guess the Lucky Wander Boy kind of touches on it, but other than that, I think Damien kind of goes into it most deeply of anyone I've seen. I mean, it's a totally off the map area that I haven't really seen addressed in any serious writing really that I can think of. I mean,
I'm very excited to be a part of this. I haven't gotten into it just yet. It's like I'm waiting to really crack into it for when I get home, I think.
Yeah, it's a highly recommended writer who he's just released an anthology which he edited called the Onyx Book of Occult Fiction, which I have a story in as well. We're in like the shilling products phase of the discussion here, but
plug it up. That's what it's
plug
for.
it up. Yeah, so everyone should check out Damian Murphy's both his own fiction and things he's edited or kind of organized. Really highly recommended and kind of unprecedented writer because again I just don't know anyone that has really kind of like mined this area or like even really noticed it.
Which we need so much more of. If there's one hill I'm gonna die on, it's like let's get smarter writing about video games out there.
Yeah, I'd like
about
to
how they affect us.
I'd like to have more of it. I just did a very brief essay for a magazine here called Fiiko, which it was edited by a Japanese writer called Yu Hirayama. And, he just commissioned me to write about Seiken Densetsu 2, or Secret of Mana, as it's known in the West, which another very deep and quite surprisingly immersive game. One of the few 3-player RPGs from the time, too. I mean, it's kind of unusual.
We need more 3-player games as well. It's a more interesting balance than 4 or 2, I think. But no, your article on Secret of Mana was great. It was a very... important and formative game for me in my
Yeah.
teenage years because I played it with like my two best friends. So, like a trio is so well balanced, you know. A duo is almost too intimate sometimes,
Yeah.
and four people is like it just has no balance. It's chaos. But three is like this sweet spot, and there's so few 3-player games, and Secret of Mana being one, which also required the Super Nintendo multi-tap, which is kind of rare.
Yeah.
What's the expression? Three's a party, four's a crowd.
It's a little bit like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, super strange game, and reading some other reviews of it, including by the people that created it, it seems to have been a bit, lightning in the bottle, where it's like just that specific combination of factors at the time, which they really haven't been able to repeat since with that series. I mean, there's some interesting games after it, but
maybe I should be asking this also on the behalf of the listener, but
Yeah.
what is this game? I just have this is the first time I've ever heard of
it's
it.
part of a series called Seiken Densetsu, or like the Holy Sword Legend. But this is the second one, which was ported to the West as Secret of Mana.
Okay.
Which then in the West is generally known as the Mana series because it's Secret of Mana, Legend of Mana, Sword of Mana, but here it's Seiken Densetsu.
Yeah.
What are the mechanics?
Action RPG.
Which was pretty new at the time.
Yeah,
The RPG genre was very turn-based and menu-heavy, and this one focused on being real-time and actiony. So it's very much a formative action RPG.
Real time, like real time strategy, or
No, there's no like you're walking. It's a overhead perspective, 2D, top down, 2D.
okay.
It looks very much like Link to the Past.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, that's I think at the time, like the only contemporary point of comparison would really be Zelda, and I think that's what it was most often compared to, is like A Link to the Past. But
it's not. It's 3-player, but optionally. Like it's mostly a single player game, but it has like full drop in, drop out 2 or 3 player, which is pretty unprecedented.
Yeah, it's pretty.
It made pretty heavy use of, for the time, like AI character control, because like I mean, if you're just playing it by yourself, I mean, you do have 2 supplementary characters, and like there was like a menu option where you'd have to set their AI, like how aggressive do you want them to be. Do you want them to always follow you? Do you want them to go ahead? Do you want them to defend? Right. So you had to put some,
which I actually never engaged in because I only ever played with friends. So that's actually new to me to know that there were those settings.
Quite like, again, if you're thinking like early 1993, I mean, it's quite sophisticated for the time, and again, almost nothing that could be compared to, really.
And
I mean,
it had the sort of RPG quality of showing damage numbers, like when you would hit or get hit, it shows the HP amount and things like that, and it had. Right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, the numbers would bounce up.
And it has a meter for when you can attack. So there is sort of this timed element. So it's not like immediately twitchy reactionary like Zelda was.
Yeah, and the other thing is that like this is another interesting mechanic which was kind of unprecedented at the time too, was like just touching the enemies wouldn't damage you. So they like you just touching them wouldn't damage them either.
They had to strike.
Yeah,
basically.
so they had to actually make a strike that could hit you or not. And same way, so you could get very physically up close with enemies and touch them, and you'd be just pushing up against them, and then you'd have to like actually, strike, which even now is kind of not as common as it.
That breaks an understanding element of video game design, is like you do not touch, at least in 2D games. You do not
certainly
bump
at the
up
time.
against.
I mean, certainly at that time, I mean, it was quite unusual to be able to like physically touch the enemies without anything really happening. I mean, it's quite unusual in an interesting way that kind of actually worked out. So yeah, it's a very super influential game, which I think people are still kind of sleeping on, in some ways.
The action RPG has really replaced the turn-based RPG in pretty much every avenue. I think the Yakuza games are actually doing an interesting return to turn-based in some ways, but otherwise...
Turn-based is like Final Fantasy type thing?
Like old Final Fantasy, because
Okay,
Final Fantasy hates turn-based now. Like they're like really like move away from
Yeah,
it.
they used to like the old Final Fantasies. It was called the active time battle, where it was
That started in
sorta,
6, I think,
Yeah,
the
it's
ATB.
But
sorta-
that's like the your team lined up against their team
that's
and
right.
select the attacks for
Yeah,
each person.
that's the one.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very menu heavy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus like having actions mapped to face buttons and
Right.
knowing your like command
Yeah,
inputs
yeah.
and doing it, twitchy and responsively.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So Secret of Mana is a very action intense game where you are actually just running up and physically attacking enemies without needing to spend too much time in, menus. I mean, there are menus for magic and stuff, but it's not super. It's way more, I guess, immediate than anything else at the time other than Zelda, I guess. I don't know what.
Which
else you would-
leans so much heavier
Yeah.
into like the adventure and puzzly side than it does like the strategy menuing kind of side. But your article, you spent a good amount of time just talking about the box art.
Yeah,
how thematically.
That was more my focus. I mean, I was almost more concerned with like just the aesthetics of it. Like we were talking a little bit earlier about the music as well, which is another huge part of it. But certainly the artist Isono Hiro is quite a outstanding kind of like science fictional artist who created these like very detailed, nature kind of schematics of art for this game, which I think is still kind of what people immediately recognize when they think of it. Is they just think of that very green cover.
It's one of the best box art covers
some of the
all
best,
time.
like the Nintendo Power poster for that is one of the best. I think that
You put a lot of emphasis on the lack of emphasis on the protagonists. On the box art, they're very small. They're in the lower right hand corner.
Yeah.
They're not facing us, so we just see their backs. The three of them are completely dwarfed by nature, and then you even bring up that like the foreground pink flamingo.
Yeah, it's like random
cranes.
flamingos that are like more central.
They're more central and like larger than the protagonist. So it's like the nature dwarfing the hero's journey in it. Like they're not the central narrative in a way.
Yeah, very strange. Like very strange even for the time, because I mean most box art of the time was very standard. Close up on the heroes or close up on their weapons, or
which even
stuff,
so, at least they were like hand drawn artists in a completely different visual style than the actual game.
Yeah.
I really lament the loss of box art.
There's a lot of value to that too, and I think unfortunately, we have kind of moved away from that. But
now it's like screen grabs of ingrained graphics, which are not as interesting as these sort of like outside
original
representations
art,
of original art. Yeah,
similar to movie posters too, though, right? I mean,
movie posters have just been so homogenized.
Yeah, you see, these like hand drawn '80s and '70s posters for things that kind of had their own appeal as well. Yeah. How's our time?
Yeah, let's wrap up here. I think. Yeah.
I just have like a ingrained sense of the time now. Where
Oh, you're good at that, because I would like if we're talking like this, I would like oh, I could go.
Well, after doing like 20 episodes, like you start to get sort of a time sense of like, oh, it's probably about time.
Yeah. We should probably head out.
We should probably head out. Yeah.
Try and
go get something to eat.
Get some food here.
Oh, hell yeah.
Gonna get some tasty food. So Jeff, like thanks for coming on the show, and
plug it up again.
I think
Jeffrey Lange.
Yeah, we'll try to.
Zero Issues Lange.
Zero Issues Lange. I got a Patreon. It's free Patreon. You don't have to pay anything, but like go ahead and do the little subscribe, because then you get the email notification every time I put out a new article. And I'm always writing about either a book I read, a movie I saw, or a game I played, and trying to elevate the conversation on these things.
Anyone watching this should check this out. I mean, especially if you are interested in this kind of like nexus of like long form, Substack kind of writing about video games crossing over with, real life kind of memoir kind of stuff in interesting ways. I mean, if that's something you're interested in, you should definitely go and investigate this Patreon. Yeah.
And also we'll have something upcoming. We're all involved in Damien's collection.
Yeah, we will.
So that's
hopefully that's
forthcoming.
going to come out next year. There's a lot of things in the works. I mean, there's a lot of publications coming out that will be interesting in the not too distant future.
Justin
Isis 1 on X, and Justin Isis 93 on Instagram.
You sure it's not backwards? Anyway.
It's 93 on Instagram
Okay.
and 1 on
Okay, yeah.
Twitter.
My bad.
X, yeah.
Yeah, DBLV Instagram. Yeah, thanks for listening. Thank you, Jeffrey, for coming on. Great having you.
My pleasure.
Great chatting with you.
Yeah.
Be back soon. And yeah, thanks everyone.
All right.
Have a good week.
Later.
Peace.